What if I told you the fall of Rome wasn't a single event, but a slow-motion disaster that took a century? From the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD to the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, the Western Empire crumbled piece by piece. Tonight, we'll trace how ordinary people experience this decline, one missed meal, one burned village at a time. You wake to an unfamiliar quiet. The usual pre-dawn clatter of carts on the Via Annia is missing, replaced by the nervous chatter of neighbours in the street. The tax collector's autumn visit never came, though no official word arrived to explain why. In the forum, merchants exchange glances more than goods. Something feels wrong in the way a fever creeps up before the shakes begin. The garrison commander drinks too early these days. His men still polish their armour, but the pay chests haven't been filled since midsummer. When you ask about the missing tax collector, he spits in the dust and mutters about barbarians crossing the Danube. The stories contradict each other. Raiding parties, entire tribes, maybe even a Gothic king leading them. Few believe the official bulletins nailed to the basilica door, claiming temporary logistical delays. At the market, the flour seller weighs your coins twice before shaking his head. His scales tip differently each time, the silver content slipping like sand through fingers. The vinegar merchant has resorted to tallying sales on a wax tablet again, muttering about worthless currency. Across the square, 3 stalls stand empty, their owners either conscripted or fled. Those who remain have doubled prices, though no one knows exactly why. The road to Aquileia sits abandoned most mornings. Where 20 mule trains once raised dust clouds daily, now a single traveller might pass before noon. The imperial post riders stopped coming weeks ago, cutting your town off from the brittle reassurances of Ravenna. People whisper that bandits have taken whole stretches of the Via Postumia, though no legion arrives to clear them. Even the iron from Noricum hasn't come through since the last moon. Your neighbour's son returned yesterday from garrison duty near Poetovio. He talks of troops melting away like spring snow, some deserting, others just walking home when their wages stopped. The remaining soldiers look more like brigands, he says, stripping the countryside bare rather than protecting it. When pressed about rumours of barbarian hordes, he just shrugs and fingers the crude knife at his belt. In the baths, the hippocaust hasn't been stoked properly in days. The attendant blames a shortage of slaves, but everyone knows the state fuel shipments stopped arriving. The few bathers speak in hushed tones about towns sacked beyond the mountains, though no one can name which ones. The usual debate over gladiator matches has given way to arguments over whether to bar the gates or flee south. That night, you lie awake listening to the unaccustomed silence. No watchman calls the hours, no carts rumble toward dawn markets, just the occasional barking dog and the sigh of wind through empty porticos. The great machinery of empire, which once thrummed through every Roman road and counting house, has begun winding down like a neglected water clock. By morning, half the shops remain shuttered. The butcher displays only scrawny fowl instead of the usual lamb. A blacksmith's apprentice tells you his master left before sunrise to seek work in a larger town. When a lone imperial courier finally arrives near midday, he bypasses the magistrate's office entirely, riding straight to the granary commander's quarters. The few who witness it trade grim looks. When the garrison abruptly marches out that afternoon, they take the last decent horses and twice their usual rations. No orders are posted, no explanation given. The commander avoids meeting anyone's gaze as his depleted column vanishes northward. By sunset, someone has pried the bronze imperial eagles from the barracks doors. You walk home past dwindling market stalls, stepping over a shattered amphora no one bothered to sweep up. Ahead, a merchant quietly boards up his warehouse as his wife bundles their children into an overladen cart. The road's silence has become deafening, like the moment between lightning and thunder when you know the storm is coming but haven't heard it yet. The coins in your purse feel wrong today. You pour them into your palm. and they make a thinner sound than they used to, less silver, more tin. The face of Emperor Majorian looks blurred, like the die was poorly engraved or struck too many times. A year ago, these same denarii would buy 2 measures of good Syrian olive oil. Now the merchant just shakes his head when you slide them across the counter. Broken Roman coins are everywhere. You find them in the plaza fountain, swapped out for prayers nobody answers. Kids use them as gaming pieces in the dirt. Some have chunks hacked out where people literally cut their losses, testing the metal like butchers carving spoiled meat. The silversmith shop shut down months back. No point assaying coins when even the assayers know they're worthless. Your landlord stopped accepting cash last season. These days he wants nails, tools, anything that holds real value. The changeover happened fast. 1 month the market stalls posted prices in sesterces. Now they barter directly. The wine seller offers his amphorae only for iron goods or hard wheat. The baker takes firewood but scowls at copper. Everyone's become an expert in relative value, their eyes constantly calculating like moneylenders at a bankruptcy auction. Rome hasn't minted proper silver coinage in years. The old imperial mints at Leon and Arles went dark first, then the Spanish workshops. They say the Eastern emperors still strike gold solid in Constantinople, but those never make it past Ravenna. What little silver remains gets hoarded by the few officials still pretending the administration functions. Last month, a rumour spread that fresh coins were coming up the Flaminian Way. Turned out to be a mule train carrying lead seal stamps for tax documents nobody uses anymore. You watch 2 merchants argue over a bolt of Gaulish wool. One offers coins from a rotting purse, the other laughs and demands lamp oil instead. Nearby, a farmer weighed down with turnips stares at the imperial tax notice nailed to the basilica wall, still demanding payment in cash that hasn't circulated since the last emperor died. The tax collectors gave up trying to enforce it months back, switching to confiscating grain stores directly from barns. Children play with coins in the gutter like pebbles, oblivious when their mothers hiss at them to stop. What used to buy a soldier's daily bread now barely covers scrap value. At the bathhouse, the attendant shrugs when you offer a fistful of washed-out Antoniniani. His fee is now 2 eggs or an hour's labour stoking the furnace. Even the beggars have grown pickier, refusing the worst coins unless they're desperate. The money changers' tables sit empty by the forum. One particularly stubborn old Greek still comes every morning, setting out his scales out of habit. He spends his days sorting through sacks of debased coins, muttering about silver content ratios nobody cares to hear. When questioned, he'll show you an emperor's face stamped 12 years ago, sharp-edged, high relief, then point to last year's version, a flattened ghost of the same portrait. His scales confirm what everyone knows but won't say aloud. Rome's wealth evaporated before its borders cracked. You try buying bread with a coin from your grandfather's time. Thick, heavy, unmistakably silver. The baker's eyes widen. He hesitates, then suddenly you're bargaining like barbarians beyond the Rhine, haggling over how many measures of flour equal 1 solid piece of dead men's money. Behind you in line, a veteran watches with bitter amusement. "Should have kept those when you had them," he says, tapping the empty pouch at his belt. "Back when they still paid us in something besides promises." At dusk, you count your remaining coins by lamplight. Half are so worn, the emperor's names have rubbed away entirely. Tomorrow you'll try trading them to the blacksmith for nails, though rumour says he started demanding scrap bronze instead. The money pouch feels lighter every week, as if the coins themselves are dissolving into history. Outside, rain washes the forum steps clean of commerce. Somewhere in the hills, a Gothic chieftain counts Roman gold taken as tribute, while your town relearns how to live without coins, without markets, without the invisible threads that once tied the world together. Money was the first thing to go. The reassuring weight of silver in your palm, the guarantee that stamped eagles meant measurable value. That fragile trust collapsed long before the last legion marched away. Now people eye each other's tools and livestock with the same sharp calculation once reserved for assessing coin purity. The empire didn't just run out of soldiers or walls, it ran out of reasons for anyone to believe stamped metal mattered. The forum isn't just quiet, it's abandoned in a way that makes your footsteps echo. Where lawyers once argued over property disputes and merchants haggled over African pottery, now there's only pigeons pecking at cracked marble. The magistrate's bench hasn't had a seated official in months. Last week, someone stole the bronze scales of justice that hung behind it, leaving rusty hooks like unanswered questions. You pass the Curia building. Doors ajar, scrolls scattered across the floor where clerks drop them in their haste to leave. A shattered inkpot stains the steps black. Everyone remembers when the governor's staff worked here, their scribes producing endless tax rolls and decrees. Then came the morning they found the office doors nailed shut from the inside. No edict explained it. The few remaining clerks drifted away within days, taking whatever records they could carry. The bronze statue of Probus near the rostra tilts at a drunken angle now. Someone tried to melt his feet for scrap metal, but gave up halfway. The inscription plaque lies face down in the weeds, its letters still bragging about imperial victories from 70 years back. At the public fountains, green water stagnates where algae coats the lead pipes. A child's sandal floats in one basin, forgotten. 3 empty market stalls have collapsed in on themselves like decaying teeth. The others operate sporadically, maybe 2 days a week when farmers bother coming to town. You recognise a former tax agent turned sheep trader haggling over wool prices. His government issue belt looks out of place without the rest of the uniform. He catches you staring and shrugs. "Someone's still got to eat," he mutters, counting greasy coins in his palm. At midday, you notice the absence of the water clock's chime. Its mechanism broke last winter, and no civic funds remain to repair it. Time itself feels looser without those hourly markers. Merchants open when they please. Labourers work odd hours. The sundial in the square still functions, but fewer people check it. Without courts to convene or officials to appease, punctuality becomes optional. By the vacant praetor's office, a faded notice about road tolls flaps in the wind. The parchment is 2 emperors out of date. Beneath it, newer graffiti in crude Latin warns travellers about bandits near the 7th milestone. No one's bothered to take either message down. Civic bulletins have become relics rather than rules, posted out of habit, ignored by necessity. The remaining shopkeepers cluster near the basilica steps like survivors on a raft, selling scraps of what they can scavenge. A potter offers cracked cups he couldn't sell before the kilns went cold. The wine merchant's amphorae all bear thick layers of dust. Only the blacksmith does steady business, mostly repairing tools that should have been replaced years ago. His hammer strikes sound sharper in the emptiness. You stop at what used to be the Graindole station. Its distribution tables now serve as firewood for squatters camped in the portico. A few still line up there on the 1st of each month out of muscle memory, though no grain has come since the provincial warehouse burned. Once people realise you're not handing out food, they wander off without speaking. Near dusk, a mangy dog trots across the rostra where orators once swayed crowds. It pauses to gnaw a bone where Cicero's ghost might have stood. The evening breeze carries whispers from alleyways where deals get made without notaries now. Barters sealed with handshakes instead of wax seals. A drunk urinates against the base of the Capitolium shrine like it's any other wall. You pass the empty records hall where generations of births, deaths and contracts were kept. Its oak doors stand wide open, the shelves inside stripped bare. Some documents went to Ravenna with the last bureaucrats. The rest likely heat someone's bathhouse. Without archives, property disputes get settled by who holds the land, not who holds the deed. Night finds you leaning against a broken column near the forum's edge. The moonlight shows where someone recently pried bronze letters from a dedication plaque, probably to melt down for spearheads. From here, you can see the whole silent expanse. The weed-choked paving stones, the looted treasury, the hollow shells of buildings that once pulsed with gossip and commerce and law. The heart didn't just stop beating, they sold the valves for scrap. The smell arrives before the news, a sharp tang of burning thatch that makes your nose wrinkle as you step outside. It's coming from the north today, carried on winds that used to bring the scent of alpine herbs. Now they deliver proof of villages burning beyond the hills. No alarm horns sound from the watchtowers. No couriers gallop in with reports. Just that stubborn smoke staining the horizon like bad ink on parchment. Your neighbour Gaius is loading his cart with frantic precision when you reach the square. He barely pauses to wipe sweat from his forehead before tossing another sack of barley into the bed. Goths at Novaria, he mutters when pressed. The name means nothing to you, just another town along the decaying road network no one maintains anymore. Someone's cousin heard it from a salt trader fleeing south. No official confirmation, no troop movements. The blacksmith's apprentice runs past with an armful of spears, nearly skewering a chicken in his haste. They're not proper legionary weapons, just fire-hardened stakes with kitchen knives lashed to the ends. The garrison took all the decent arms when they abandoned their posts last winter. Now defence falls to boys barely old enough to shave and retired soldiers nursing old wounds. Their militia drills look more like desperate pantomimes under the butcher's reluctant command. You remember when trouble meant calling the vigils, when an orderly cohort would march up the Flaminian Way at the first whiff of unrest. These days the roads belong to whoever claims them. Last week brought rumours of Frankish warbands near Mediolanum. Yesterday it was Alemanni crossing the frozen Rhine. The news changes like the smoke patterns. Never quite the same story twice, but always pointing toward collapse. At the well, women whisper about the Adige Valley massacre while drawing water. Nobody agrees on the details. Was it 3 villages burned or 30? Did the raiders take slaves or just slaughter everyone? The only certainty is that no relief forces rode out from Ravenna. The Emperor's cavalry hasn't been seen this far north in years. You watch the Cooper nail crude bars across his shop windows. His hammer strikes sound like accusation against those still pretending life continues normally. Across the street, the wool merchant's wife bundles her daughters into a covered wagon, their faces pale beneath woolen veils. The transaction happens fast, a sack of coins handed to the lead guard. His armour a mismatched collection of old legionary gear and barbarian trophies. Private security costs more than most houses now. That night, the glow on the northern horizon pulses like a slow warning. Farmers who lived through the invasions 40 years back claim they recognise the pattern. First, the outlying villas disappear, then the smaller towns, then the roads become death traps. Their grandchildren scoff until the refugees start stumbling into town at dawn, their feet wrapped in rags and their eyes hollow with stories no one wants to hear. The roads turn dangerous by increments. First, it's just the occasional highwayman preying on lone travellers. Then, armed groups demanding tolls at makeshift checkpoints. Now, entire stretches vanish into lawlessness, where neither Roman nor barbarian rules hold sway. The courier, who used to bring letters from Ravenna, stopped coming months ago. Last anyone heard, he'd switched to smuggling saltpeter for alchemists. By week's end, the smoke smells different. Closer, greasier, someone's burning corpses instead of buildings. The militia commander posts guards on the crumbling town walls, though everyone knows they couldn't stop determined children, let alone seasoned raiders. His orders come handwritten on scavenged papyrus, instead of the old imperial vellum. No eagle standard tops the gatehouse anymore, just a rusty spear lashed to the parapet with rotting cords. Distant shouts echo from the North Road at twilight. The remaining townspeople freeze like hares scenting wolves. A woman drops her basket of turnips, the vegetables rolling across paving stones still stamped with emperors' names. Then laughter rings out, human, familiar, just local herders driving sheep too skinny to interest raiders. The tension breaks like a fever, leaving everyone ashamed of their relief. You pass the empty legionary barracks on your way home, its parade ground choked with weeds. The recruiting notices peeling from the walls still promise steady pay and pensions. Behind them, some wit has chalked an altar to the unknown soldier with a crude offering of mouldy bread. The professional army didn't so much disband as dissolve. First the specialists left, then the officers, then anyone with better prospects than starving at their posts. At bedtime you wedge a chair under the door, handle for the first time in years. Outside, sentries pace their makeshift beats, their footsteps uneven without proper drill training. The wind shifts again, carrying that persistent smoke smell through cracks in the shutters. Somewhere beyond the hills, someone's world is ending, so yours might last another day. Protection used to be something Rome provided. Now it's just whatever you can cobble together between dusk and dawn. The pattern holds in miniature what happened across the empire. First the systems failed, then the symbols lost meaning, until all that remained was smoke on the wind and the choices you made while smelling it. The sickle feels heavier this harvest season. When you straighten your back to survey the field, the wheat stands sparse and stunted, like a thinning head of hair. Last year's crop filled the granary halfway. This one might not reach the third mark. No imperial grain ships have arrived at the coastal depot in 3 summers, leaving your village to survive on whatever it can coax from exhausted soil. You remember when overseers from the great estates would distribute seed stock every spring. Now those estates stand abandoned beyond the hills, their irrigation channels choked with weeds. The iron ploughshare broke last planting season, and no blacksmith travels this far into the countryside anymore. You've resorted to tilling with a fire-hardened branch, an implement your grandfather would have laughed at. The tax assessor still comes, though he no longer carries wax tablets or measuring rods. He takes his cut directly from the threshing floor now, eyeballing quantities that used to require calibrated scales. His guards eye your grain stores longer than necessary, hands resting on sword hilts. When he mentions winter shortages in Teixinum, it sounds like both warning and threat. Your neighbour Marcus tried replanting last year's seed stock against all wisdom. The resulting stalks barely reach knee height before withering. Now his family begs scraps at your door when the rains come. Others gamble on strange crops, wiry Ethiopian grains traded from a passing merchant, unfamiliar tubers from beyond the Danube. Most fail. The agricultural knowledge that sustained the empire for centuries crumbles faster than the roads that once carried its harvests. Storing grain becomes its own gamble. Without imperial garrisons to guard them, the public silos were looted bare years ago. The tax collectors take their portions immediately now, leaving families to hide what little remains beneath floorboards or in fake crypts. You've begun mixing barley with chaff just to stretch supplies, a trick the Legion quartermasters would have flogged a man for attempting. Rumours circulate about farming villages abandoning their fields entirely, taking up herding or banditry instead. The soil rebels at this mistreatment. Yields drop again and again despite your prayers to Ceres and liberal offerings to Christ. The ox died last winter, leaving you to pull the plough yourself this season alongside your eldest son. His shoulders aren't broad enough yet for the work, but hunger makes for impatient tutors. At the monthly market, barter has replaced currency entirely. A cracked amphora of wine trades for half a sack of millet. Shoes go for nails. The potter's daughter married the blacksmith's apprentice last spring, not for love, but because their families needed access to each other's trades. Even the priest takes payment in kind now, his Latin mass peppered with barbarian words for foodstuffs he once considered beneath notice. The seasons themselves seem disordered. An early frost claims half your beans. Strange new pests devour the cabbage. When rains come, they either drown the fields or skip your land entirely to fall where they please. Those who still heed the old agricultural almanacs find themselves laughing bitterly at their own naivety. Nature no longer follows Roman schedules. Your wife spends evenings picking through harvested grain kernel by kernel, removing the shriveled seeds and occasional pebbles added by unscrupulous traders. The hearth fire illuminates her work, careful, desperate arithmetic that calculates how many mouths each measure must feed. The children already know better than to ask for second helpings. Farm animals dwindle to near extinction around you. First went the plough teams, then the dairy cows, then even the scavenging chickens. Without reliable feed or protection from marauders, livestock becomes more burden than asset. Hunters return from the woods with empty bags more often than not, telling stories of game trails gone silent. Winter arrives early. The first snow finds you hauling water from a stream 2 miles distant after the well collapsed. Your breath fogs in the air as you survey the granary, mentally dividing its contents by the months ahead. The calculations never work in your favour. Somewhere beyond these hills, the Emperor's court doubtless still feasts on African wheat and Spanish oil. Here, survival has become a daily referendum on which hunger hurts least. The empire used to mean something as simple as bread appearing at the market on time. Now it's just you and the land, locked in a brutal negotiation without intermediaries. When the wind howls through the rafters tonight, it won't care about imperial edicts or tax quotas. The cold settles in like an occupying army, and your family's fate depends entirely on how well you lied to the tax collector last harvest moon. The water spurting from the aqueduct's broken joint isn't the clear mountain stream it once was. Now it oozes brownish liquid that leaves mineral stains on the fountain's basin when it flows at all. Days pass where only a sickly trickle emerges before stopping completely. The old engineer who used to monitor the sluice gates disappeared last winter, leaving no one who understands how to clear the sediment choking the channels. You visit the public baths out of habit more than hope. The changing room smells of mildew instead of lavender oil now. Cold water laps at the edges of the pool, its surface dotted with leaves blown in from broken skylights. A single attendant leans on his broom, watching you reconsider paying the entry fee. "We can't heat what we can't fill," he shrugs. Behind him, graffiti mars the wall where someone scrawled complaints about the degenerate times in jagged letters. That dripping sound echoing through the suburb isn't rainfall, it's the aqueduct weeping. Whole sections have cracked from frost heaves no one repaired. In some neighbourhoods, enterprising souls have jury-rigged clay pipes to divert the leaks straight into their homes. Others simply abandon their houses to settle closer to remaining wells. The civic maps showing Rome's water network now read like fiction, their neat lines bearing no relation to the patchwork of functional pipes. Dysentery stories spread faster than the diseases themselves. A cloth merchant's whole household perished last month after drinking from their courtyard cistern. 3 families near the Forumborium fell ill from water drawn too near a makeshift latrine ditch. The old public health regulations, those strict Roman obsessions with sewers and clean springs, seem like relics from another civilization now. People whisper that the new bishop has started blessing wells, but divine intervention makes poor substitute for lead piping. Walk the aqueduct's arcades at dawn and you'll see the infrastructure dying visibly. Ivy creeps across brickwork where maintenance crews once scrubbed daily. At least 3 arches bear fresh cracks since last winter. One section near the Capina Gate collapsed entirely last year, crushing a vegetable cart and sparing officials the embarrassment of explaining why no repairs were coming. The remaining water inspectors still make rounds, but their reports vanish into the bureaucratic void of Ravenna without response. The wealthy fled first once their private water supplies failed. Their abandoned villas now sport breached nymphia, where moss grows over marble tritons. Along the Appian Way, Looters have stripped lead pipes from entire neighbourhoods to melt down for sling bullets. What Rome doesn't cannibalise, nature reclaims. Tree roots split underground conduits, while birds nest in the broken pediments of distribution towers. Contrast this with the Tiber's filthy renaissance. Once avoided as a sluggish industrial sewer, the river becomes many districts' last resort. Women cluster at unsafe bends to scrub linen where their grandmothers would have shuddered to drink. Fishing returns to stretches previously abandoned to tannery runoff, though catfish guts now sometimes show suspicious lesions. Even the old river gods seem disgusted if the mutilated state of their remaining shrines indicates displeasure. Watch children play near the ruined Aqua Virgo and you witness history's cruel joke. They race sticks down the sluggish trickle still escaping its arches, oblivious that this ditch once supplied Rome's greatest baths. Their game mimics the cargo barges that floated produce from Ostia, a commercial artery now as mythical to them as Neptune. When one boy falls and skins his knee in the algae water, his mother scolds him with words that would have horrified their ancestors. That filth will poison you. Urban shrinkage follows the water retreat. Whole blocks near the Aventine stand empty where fountains ran dry. Former bathhouse attendants become well diggers overnight, their services paid in food rather than coin. Churches repurpose abandoned water towers as makeshift bell towers, their hollow cisterns echoing with hymns instead of plumbing. The city contracts like a dehydrated body, its extremities dying first while vital organs cling to the remaining springs. News arrives, though no one's sure how anymore, that Constantinople still maintains spectacular aqueducts and underground reservoirs. The eastern capital supposedly boasts public baths steaming at all hours, their attendants still trained in the old Roman methods. This gossip stings more than comparisons of military might or treasury contents. Decadence can be forgiven. Broken plumbing feels personal. The aqueducts didn't just supply water, they were the empire's circulatory system. When those arteries clogged and burst, the paralysis spread everywhere. No more flushing latrines, no more ornamental fountains to demonstrate civic pride. No more public baths as social equalizers where senators and labourers shared the same heated pools. Just increasing numbers of Romans bending daily at mud holes like barbarians, their backs turned toward the crumbling monuments of a civilization that forgot how to care for itself. One afternoon, you encounter workers dismantling a section of the Aqua Claudia's supports. They're not repairing, they're quarrying. The lead pipe already gone, they chip away at the decorative stone facing for use in someone's private project. No official orders them, no authority stops them. Their hammers chip at imperial eagles and commemorative inscriptions with equal indifference. Nearby, a broken outlet pipe continues dripping arrhythmically onto rubble no one bothers to clear. Rome built these aqueducts to last centuries. They survived barbarian invasions, civil wars, even volcanic eruptions. Their demise came not through violence, but through something more insidious. The slow assumption that someone else would handle maintenance. Now weeds grow where engineers once adjusted water pressure with mathematical precision, and the remaining populace adapts to a world where thirst is personal responsibility rather than civic guarantee. The final irony plays out in conquered provinces. Visigothic nobles occupying abandoned Roman villas pay premium wages to anyone who can restore their baths. Frankish kings issue decrees protecting surviving aqueducts they don't understand how to replicate. The barbarians recognize value when they see it. They just lack the institutional knowledge to preserve Rome's greatest gifts. Meanwhile, back in the Eternal City, generations perfected in hydraulic engineering now teach their children how to judge well water by the smell. The horsemen arrive at twilight, their mounts' hooves kicking up dust that glows red in the sinking sun. Their leader wears a torque necklace that would have marked him as an enemy prisoner in your grandfather's time. Now it signifies authority as he issues demands in guttural Latin peppered with unfamiliar words. Behind him, warriors eye your granary with the frank assessment of men who know they can take whatever they want. Days earlier, signs of their approach filtered through the countryside. First the refugee families fleeing northward, then the sheep herders driving flocks into wooded hills. 3 nights ago, distant fires bloomed along the horizon like deadly flowers. Now they sit in your magistrate's chair without invitation, boots propped on the curia table where edicts used to be drafted. Their weapons rest against the wall where the fasces once symbolised Roman justice. Payment comes due immediately, not in coins, those lost meaning months back, but in grain, tools, livestock. One warrior tests the edge of his knife against a tax collector's abandoned wax tablet, splitting it cleanly in half. The message needs no translation. Behind him, younger fighters inventory the village with predatory efficiency, calculating grain stores, assessing women's ages, estimating how many horses the smithy might shoe per day. The old regulations mean nothing here. That much becomes clear when they drag Marcellus from his threshold for protesting the seizure of his plough ox. The Germanic chieftain listens without interest as the farmer cites imperial farming subsidies from 20 years past. A backhanded blow with a mailed fist settles the argument. Blood drips onto the cobblestones where civil lawsuits once played out before reasoned magistrates. Witnesses suddenly find urgent business elsewhere. Adaptation happens swiftly at sword point. The blacksmith gains sudden fluency in Frankish words for bridle parts. Farmers learn which crops their new overlords prefer: rye over wheat, pigs over orchards. The remaining town clerk repurposes tax records to tally tribute quotas, scratching out imperial headings in favour of phonetic renderings of barbarian names. Everyone develops excellent hearing for the particular creak of foreign saddle leather approaching town. Personal grievances now carry lethal weight. When the baker's son objects to a warrior taking liberties with his sister, the ensuing brawl destroys half the marketplace. No advocates rush to plead his case. No city guards intervene. Judgment comes swift as an axe. 3 dead, the bakery confiscated, the sister remarried to the victor by sundown. Lex Romana gives way to weregild customs, where a man's value equals his weapon's weight in silver. Resistance coalesces in dangerous whispers. Veterans of the legions, those who still remember drill manoeuvres, meet in abandoned barracks to sharpen salvaged swords. The priest preaches coded sermons about Judith and Holofernes. But when the wine merchant's conspiratorial muttering reaches the wrong ears, his crucified body appears outside town for the crows. The message lingers for weeks after the corpse falls apart. Defiance now carries consequences no civic court would ever have sanctioned. Oddly, some thrive under the new disorder. Certain merchants prosper supplying the occupiers with Roman luxuries they've developed tastes for. Glassware, dyed woolens, sweet wines. Enterprising girls master enough pidgin language to serve as interpreters, gaining influence through this linguistic bridge. Even the remaining imperial bureaucrats pivot effortlessly, applying their paperwork skills to inventorying loot for barbarian treasuries. The town drunk finds unexpected work, teaching Gothic chiefs how to read Latin deeds to the villas they've seized. Law becomes intensely local. On market day, a Suebian warlord adjudicates disputes from a makeshift throne in the basilica. His justice leans heavily toward his own men, but even this partial order feels preferable to total anarchy. He respects written contracts, provided they're translated aloud by someone whose family he holds hostage. Slowly, folk wisdom acclimates. Never accuse a warrior without proof. Always gift his wife first, if seeking favour. Kill quickly when you must, because blood feuds last generations now. The old imperial statues acquire curious upgrades. A marble Augustus now wears a fur cloak draped over his chiselled shoulders. A bronze Trajan sports a braided beard of wrought iron, added by some homesick conqueror. Even the defaced monuments marking ancient victories over barbarians get repurposed. One Vandal chief uses them as mounting blocks for his horse, enjoying the irony. Children adapt fastest of all. They mimic the newcomers' war cries in their games, fashion stick versions of. Distinctive longswords, their Latin acquires loanwords for weapons and livestock they never knew before. One particularly bold girl earns coppers demonstrating how to properly wrap a toga for visiting chieftains who want to play at being Roman magistrates during feast days. Power never consolidates neatly. 1 week brings a Burgundian tax collector demanding pork tributes. The next, a Gothic raiding party burns the Burgundian outpost and imposes their own levy system. The village becomes fluent in calculating which warlord's anger will prove most hazardous this season. Survival depends on reading shifting alliances as carefully as merchants once tracked grain futures. Stories still arrive from Ravenna, fragments about emperors petitioning barbarian kings rather than commanding them, about senatorial families marrying their daughters to Germanic warlords for protection. These tales sound increasingly mythical, like legends of the Republic's founding. Here at the sharp end of history, reality wears a wolfskin cloak and counts your winter stores with greedy eyes. Lore flows from whichever direction shields happen to face when the fighting starts. The mighty learned too late what the powerless always knew. Authority was never about purple robes or senatorial decrees. It lives in the hands of those willing to break doors instead of knock, to take rather than ask politely. Rome spent centuries building systems to make violence unnecessary, right up until the moment barbarians proved systems crumble faster than swords decay. Now every village calculates obedience versus resistance on scales weighted with cold steel instead of imperial seals. The empire's long sunset leaves people squinting not at vanishing grandeur, but at the blade-edge pragmatism of dawn's harsh new light. Your daughter traces letters in the dirt with a stick, but they're not the elegant Latin capitals drilled into generations of Roman children. These are scratchy runes taught by the blacksmith's Gothic wife, angular marks better suited for carving into weapons than composing poetry. The schoolhouse hasn't been used in years except to stable horses. Its last tutor left to become quartermaster for a Frankish warband, swapping Virgil's verses for supply lists rendered in broken Latin-German hybrids. The shift happened quietly at first. Fewer grammar lessons, more practical instruction in weapon maintenance. Then monks took over education, focusing solely on scripture and copying hymns. Now even the monastery school prioritizes training altar boys who can chant Germanic liturgy over teaching Cicero's speeches. The marketplace has become the true classroom. Children learn numbers by counting spears in raiders' hands, vocabulary from the pidgin dialects of frontier traders. You find old exercises crumbling in a chest, wax tablets with lines from Horace now serving as kindling. The looping handwriting of some long-dead schoolboy still visible beside his instructor's corrections. Those precise red markings seem absurd now. Who needs to master the subjunctive mood when debating whether to flee from Alemanni raiders? The carefully copied maxims about civic duty mock the current reality where warlords measure worth in sword strokes rather than rhetorical flourishes. Law was Latin's last stronghold until recently. Even illiterate farmers once respected stamped documents from distant bureaucracies. Now legal disputes end with duels judged by the length of contestants' shadows at noon. The last notary in town repurposed his stylus for tattooing barbarian chieftains with crucifixes they can't read. Visitors from Ravenna still expect petitions drafted in proper legal formulae, but the scribe who used to handle such work now keeps his literacy hidden. Better to be valued for sharpening swords than composing letters no one will answer. Church Latin survives in twisted form. The priest still chants Mass correctly, but his parishioners garble responses that would have earned them beatings in church schools decades ago. His attempts to teach scripture devolve into pantomime, acting out Noah's Ark when listeners confuse arca with arcs. Bible stories transformed through retelling, their Latin titles mangled into something halfway between prayer and profanity. The Vulgate remains the last bastion of classical language, but even St. Jerome's prose can't withstand steady erosion by impatient Gothic converts. Clerks become precious relics. The one remaining administrator who can still draft a proper property deed charges outrageous fees, 2 chickens per scroll. Families who once proudly educated sons for civil service now apprentice them to armourers instead. Why memorise legal codes when survival depends on forging chainmail? The few literate men left enjoy fleeting status translating between warlords and peasants, though truth often gets stretched thinner than parchment when swords hang in the balance. Your son surprises you one evening by reciting Horace from memory. His pronunciation falters, missing musical quantities drilled into your childhood. Still, the verses flow well enough to make your throat tighten. An eerie echo of civilization in a hut that smells of smoked meat and damp wool. He learned them secretly from the drunken ex-schoolmaster who now cleans stables. Why bother, his friends taunt when they catch him practicing. The answer hangs unspoken, because someday words might matter again. Public inscriptions fade without renewal. Weather erodes dedication plaques, vandals chip away at triumphal inscriptions. The monument celebrating Aurelian's victory over the Goths now bears fresh carvings telling a different story. Crude Germanic runes commemorating some recent raid. Even graffiti shifts, the stylized Latin curses of legionaries replaced by stick figure boasts of ale-drinking contests. Only the oldest beggars still recite the inscriptions they memorized as children while picking through garbage at the forum's edge. Latin retreats into liturgy and calculation. Monks preserve it in isolated scriptoria. Merchants cling to numerals for accounts. Physicians mutter Galenic prescriptions like spells. But conversational fluency decays like an unattended aqueduct, first losing complexity, then coherence, finally drying up entirely. The bishop struggles to explain transubstantiation to converts who think hoc est corpus is just magic words spoken before meals. Letters lost their power when the people who understood their magic died or adapted. The beautifully phrased edict sits unused in its leather case while the illiterate warlords. Shouted decree moves armies. What use is rhetorical elegance when threats are delivered through an interpreter who smells of onions and fear? The last advantage slips away. Being Cicero's intellectual heir means nothing compared to being cousin to whoever controls the grain stores this winter. Someday, scholars would call this transformation the birth of Romance languages. For those living through it, the change feels like watching a bridge collapse stone by stone. Each eroded case ending, each simplified verb conjugation marks another plank giving way beneath civilization's feet. The children playing in the ruins of the grammar school don't miss what they never knew. To them, Latin is just the strange chanting from the basilica, as foreign and formal as the broken statues watching over their makeshift ball games. Rome didn't just lose territory or treasury, it forgot how to speak to itself. The elegant linguistic architecture that spanned continents now survives in fragments. A declension here, a legal formula there, like scattered bricks from a demolished villa. Words that once moved elections and marshalled legions now echo faintly behind altar rails, powerless against the grunts and gestures that get real work done in this newer, rougher world. Language didn't evolve, it retreated, leaving people to cobble together communication from whatever verbal scraps still hold value. You catch your daughter practicing her Latin conjugations some nights when she thinks no one listens. The verbs tumble out all wrong. Third declension nouns botched with fifth declension endings. She's piecing together language like a scavenger, assembling armour from battlefield scraps. When you correct her quietly, she stares like you've revealed alchemy. For a moment, the firelight makes the shack feel like a scholar's study. Then the baby cries, the bruise boils over, and fluency becomes one more impractical dream shelved for better times. The Goths' children will Latinize eventually. The Franks will adopt scattering of legal terms. But the living pulse of classical expression, the precise tool that built and sustained an empire, already stiffens into liturgical fossils and legal embalming fluid. Rome lasts another hour each time someone remembers to distinguish between pecunia and argentum, between amicus and sodalis. But those distinctions matter less each season, like remembering the proper way to fold a toga while wearing wolf pelts against the cold. The roads don't hum with cart traffic anymore. That constant background noise of wheels on stone, mules braying, merchants haggling at way stations, it's all gone. Now you hear wind whistling through abandoned mile markers, the occasional creak of a lone farmer's cart with its makeshift wooden axles. The Roman roads built to last centuries are slowly being digested by the landscape, their carefully layered foundations undermined by weeds no one clears. Last summer's trading caravan never arrived from Arelate. No Lycian merchants came with spices, no Syrian traders with glassware. The depot master still sits outside his empty warehouse out of habit, whittling figurines from scrap wood while waiting for shipments that won't come. His ledger shows the decline in stark columns. First fewer traders each season, then just one or two desperate souls with half-empty packs. Finally, nothing but stray dogs sniffing at the loading docks. You unwrap the last of your Egyptian pepper like a relic, its scent triggering memories of markets thick with the aromas of cumin and silphium. Those spices used to flow as reliably as the Tiber. Now even regional specialties vanish. No more Gallic hams, no Spanish garum, leaking from cracked amphorae in the forum. Dinner tastes blander every year, reduced to what grows within walking distance. Hunger becomes monotony. News atrophies fastest. Without imperial couriers or merchant gossip, rumours replace facts. Stories mutate with each telling. Did the Vandals sack Carthage or just raid its outskirts? Is Anthemius still emperor, or did another general take the purple? The few travellers who trickle through swapped contradictory reports like barter goods, their tales growing wilder with each retelling. By the time word arrives about Ravenna falling, you'll likely hear it from a Visigoth boasting over his ale. The decay reveals itself in small absences. No more specialist craftsmen arriving seasonally, the Aquilean lens grinders, the Capuan bronzesmiths. Neighbours hoard broken tools, knowing replacements won't come. Your wife wears the same brass hairpin for 3 years because the jewellery seller who wintered here hasn't been seen since the Alpine passes became too dangerous. Even basic commodities disappear. Spanish olive oil replaced by rancid local presses, African ceramics by crude handmade pots. You catch yourself staring down empty stretches of the Via Flaminia some evenings, half expecting the haze to resolve into a mule train. The road's engineering still astonishes. Raised beds defying floods, graceful curves conquering terrain. But without constant maintenance, cracks spread like wrinkles on an aging face. Last winter's floods eroded whole sections near the river crossing. No engineer arrived to supervise repairs. Now farmers scavenge paving stones for foundations. Regional dialects thicken in isolation. The Latin spoken 20 miles north acquires strange vowels and borrowed Germanic terms. Your cousin from Narbo visited last year and you struggled to follow his marketplace chatter littered with Gothic loanwords. Without the binding force of commerce and bureaucracy, language starts drifting like an untethered boat. Soon, neighbouring valleys won't understand each other's curses. Children playing near the deserted Mancio invent elaborate myths about its purpose. To them, the hollow shell with its stables and ruined frescoes might as well be a giant's house. They've never seen travellers arrive at dusk seeking lodging, never watched messengers change horses at a gallop. The stone trough where mounts once drank now collects rainwater for stray goats. Odd ruptures punctuate the decline. One spring, a shock. Frankish merchants arrive direct from the Rhine with amber and furs, bypassing the old Mediterranean routes entirely. Their crude wagons follow the broken military roads straight through territory Rome abandoned. They shrug when asked about conditions in Massilia. Goths run the ports now, their leader says, as if commenting on the weather. Winter brings the deepest silence. Snow muffles what little foot traffic remains. The village feels like the last settlement on Earth, huddled against the cold with no news from beyond the hills. People measure time by harvests, not consular years. The wider world, its politics, its luxuries, its endless cycles of trade, might as well be mythology. Someone mentions the Eastern Emperor rebuilding Constantinople's walls, and it sounds as distant as Alexander's conquests. Farmers near the roads risk new hazards. Bandits haunt the tree lines, scavengers pick over stalled carts, wolves grow bold approaching unattended grain shipments. Travel becomes a gamble rather than routine. Those who venture far carry goods internally, swallowing gems in wax pellets, sewing coins. Into hems, knowing highwaymen won't bother searching corpses too thoroughly. The changing road crews tell the story clearest, where Legion engineers once supervised slaves laying perfect flagstones. Now ragged work gangs patch holes under the watch of some warlord's lieutenant. Their repairs look like scars, uneven, haphazard, purely functional. They laugh when asked about drainage gradients. Road just needs to get from here to there, their foreman sneers, kicking at deteriorating curbstones. At night sometimes, lying awake, you imagine the roads as veins emptied of blood. No more African grain feeding the capital, no Spanish silver minting into coins, no Dalmatian marble reaching the masons, just stretches of sterile pavement connecting nothing to nowhere. The great circulatory system that sustained an empire now lies inert, its purpose as forgotten as the names of the engineers who plotted its curves with such care. The silence of the roads becomes its own presence, not peaceful, but heavy. Each vacant stretch whispers the same truth. Civilizations end not with shouts, but with dwindling footsteps. The last trader to pass through told of meeting a Gothic noble wearing a toga over his furs, carefully studying Latin grammar. It seemed absurd at the time. Now you wonder which of you was truly the ghost haunting a dying world. The news arrives with a travelling spice merchant, his cart half empty, and his Latin salted with Eastern accents. He glances over his shoulder before murmuring it. The boy emperor is gone. No fanfare, no last stand. Just a barbarian general removing a teenager from a throne that stopped meaning anything years ago. The merchant doesn't even say abdication. He uses the word dismissed, like a servant being sent away without wages. They called him Romulus Augustulus, Little Augustus, an administrator's joke that stuck, crowning a child with echoes of Rome's first emperor and legendary founder. His 10-month reign barely registered outside Ravenna's crumbling palace halls. The real power had been Odoacer's for years, a Germanic mercenary commander who finally stopped pretending Rome still ruled its own armies. The deposition feels less like a conquest than a formality, like cutting down a dead tree that's been rotting upright for seasons. The ceremony, if you can call it that, happened quietly. No last speech before the Senate, no dramatic suicide. Just a scribe recording the transfer of imperial regalia to Constantinople. The diadem, the scepter, the purple cloak, sent east where emperors still sit on real thrones. Odoacer kept the western lands but requested patrician status from the eastern ruler, a neat bit of political theatre where everyone pretends Rome hadn't already split in half decades earlier. You hear different versions in the marketplace. Some claim the boy was exiled to a Campanian villa with a generous pension. Others insist he begged for his life in faulty Latin. A drunk former clerk swears he saw the imperial robes cut up for horse blankets, but he's been saying variants of this since the Visigoths sacked the city. What no one debates, the last emperor was deposed by someone his ancestors would have called a barbarian in a city that hadn't been the capital for generations, ending a reign nobody truly recognised anyway. The town crier doesn't announce it formally. Why would he? The last official bulletin from Ravenna took 8 months to arrive and concerned mule breeding quotas. Instead, people gather at the well to whisper. A leather worker's daughter married a garrison soldier who heard it from a messenger bound for Gaul. The details get fuzzier with each retelling, but the core remains. No new emperor will be proclaimed in the West. Reactions skew strangely practical. The blacksmith wonders aloud if tax collectors will still come. A farmer's wife shrugs and says she's been paying levies to Gothic warlords for years anyway. Only the retired grammarian seems shaken. He keeps misplacing his stylus while muttering about the end of an era. His students glance at each other, unsure whether to humour him. They've lived their whole lives knowing more Gothic warriors than Roman senators. Outwardly, little changes. The same merchants haggle in the forum. The same barbarian officers patrol the walls. But something intangible shifts. The pretense evaporates. When disputes arise now, people instinctively look toward the Germanic garrison commander's hall rather than the boarded-up courthouse. The imperial bust gathering dust in the baths officially becomes a relic rather than a representation of living authority. Odd relics of empire persist. A tax notice from 5 years back still hangs near the market, peeling at the edges but technically still in force. The mile markers on the Via Aemilia continue to count distances from a Rome most travellers now avoid. Church services still pray for the emperor's health until someone points out there isn't one, prompting an awkward pause before the priest improvises a blessing for all lawful authorities. For older residents, the news lands differently. They remember when imperial couriers wore clean uniforms, when the post arrived reliably, when the word emperor meant stability rather than nostalgia. One greybeard insists his grandfather met Honorius, though the story increasingly centres on the size of the imperial ostrich plume rather than any act of governance. His listeners nod politely while calculating how this development might affect grain shipments. The younger generation adapts instantly. They've been living in Odoacer's Italy for years without realising it. To them, emperor was always an abstraction, like senators or aqueduct maintenance, or any of the other imperial functions that gradually stopped functioning. They'll learn Frankish or Gothic as easily as their parents learned bureaucratic Latin, swapping one set of useful phrases for another. In Ravenna, bureaucrats keep drafting documents with the old formulae out of habit. They leave a blank space where the emperor's name should go until some functionary realises they can just write the time of the patrician Odoacer instead. The cursus publicum runners still jog along abandoned post roads because it's the only trade they know, even as their messages grow increasingly irrelevant. You pass the old imperial shrine outside town at dusk. The statues lack heads now, some broken off during riots, others sold to collectors. A weathered plaque still proclaims eternal glory to the empire beneath layers of bird droppings. Tonight, for the first time, it feels like reading a tombstone rather than a boast. Not because Rome has fallen, but because nobody bothered to notice when it finished happening. The merchant packs his remaining spices, pepper from India grown scarce, cinnamon increasingly expensive. He mentions offhand that Constantinople still refers to the West as imperial provinces, a polite fiction everyone maintains for trade purposes. When asked who rules now, he laughs and pats his sword. Same as always, he says, whoever can enforce the rent. Years later, monks will argue over the exact date. Chroniclers will debate whether it truly marked the fall of Rome or just formalised a long decay. The people who lived through it remember mostly the price of bread that winter. and whether the new barbarian overlord proved fairer than the old imperial taxmen. Empires don't end with thunderclaps. They dissolve like salt in broth, gradually, invisibly, until one day you realise the flavour's gone. The darkness arrives earlier these days, not the gradual twilight you remember from childhood, but a heavy gloom that seems to roll in before afternoon chores are finished. The olive oil lamps that once burned reliably now sit empty. No shipments from Africa mean no fuel for light. What little oil remains costs more than wine. You ration it like medicine, using only for emergencies. Candles became luxury items years ago, their beeswax traded by smugglers at outrageous prices. Most nights, darkness wins without contest. Indoors, the rhythms of domestic life warp around the absence of light. Spinning and weaving halt at dusk when fingers can't distinguish thread colours. Children's lessons shorten, no point straining eyes over wax tablets in flickering tallow dips. Even cooking shifts earlier, with meals timed to finish before shadows swallow the hearth entirely. The family clusters closer around whatever meagre light source exists, bodies competing for its warmth and illumination. Conversations grow quieter in the dark, as if words might get lost in the gloom. The streets empty faster now. Without proper lighting, the evening marketplace vanished first. Then the bathhouses reduced hours. Now even the tavern keeper shuts his doors earlier, unwilling to risk drunks stumbling home through pitch-black lanes. Walking at night becomes an exercise in memory. Counting steps to the well, fingertips brushing familiar walls, ears straining for threats the darkness conceals. Thieves thrive in these conditions. The butcher lost 3 hams last week to shadow-cloaked figures who left no footprints. Townsfolk whisper about night blindness, curses and malign spirits, but the truth is simpler. Civilization required light, and light required trade routes that no longer function. You notice unexpected casualties of the darkness. That scratched sundial in the plaza grows increasingly irrelevant. With fewer people abroad at consistent hours, who needs precise timekeeping? The night watch disbanded when torches became too expensive to justify. Even the church curtailed evening services after 2 elderly worshippers broke hips stumbling over unearthed paving stones. Technologies disappear from living memory. The glassblower who once manufactured elegant oil lamps now produces only crude jars. No one remembers how to make the delicate spouts and handles. Your neighbour's intricate 7-branch bronze lamp gathers dust. Its design too complex for local smiths to replicate when repairs were needed. People improvise with what's available. Hollowed turnips filled with rancid fat, pine knots that smoke more than illuminate, makeshift rushlights that stink of burning marsh weeds. The wealthy fare little better. That retired official's villa once boasted 100 lamps burning simultaneously during dinners. Now his descendants cluster around a single brazier, its glow barely reaching their laps. The mural of Apollo driving the sun chariot on their dining room wall seems like mockery when shadows swallow most of the painting by mid-afternoon. Their last remaining slave spends more time foraging for firewood than attending to household duties. Beneath the practical inconveniences lies a subtler shift. Without sufficient light, the world literally shrinks. News travels slower when people can't gather after dark to share it. Skills atrophy when craftsmen can't work evening hours. Ideas stagnate when scholars can't burn midnight oil. The village idiot who claims moonlight gives him visions starts drawing more listeners than the educated men who insist on waiting for proper light to read. Darkness doesn't just conceal, it isolates and simplifies. Nightmares increase. People whisper about seeing shapes moving where no shapes should be. A widow swears her deceased husband's ghost watches from the unlit corner of her hut. Children develop unnatural fears of ordinary objects that take on monstrous silhouettes in dim firelight. When old Gratianus fell and broke his leg stumbling to the latrine at night, his family didn't find him until dawn. He'd spend hours whispering prayers against unseen predators. Oddly, some flourish in the new darkness. The black market for lamp oil enriches a few smugglers. Astrologers charge premium fees for interpreting star patterns suddenly visible without light pollution. A former scribe turned dream interpreter attracts patrons who can no longer read their own documents after sunset. Adaptation favours those comfortable operating in shadows, both literal and metaphorical. The church offers partial respite. Its remaining candles make the nave the brightest public space after dusk, drawing crowds even from rival congregations. Latin litanies take on new resonance when echoed in vast darkness, punctuated by flickering flame. For many, the service's end brings dread, that reluctant step back into the lightless world where demons feel more real than distant emperors. Seasonal changes grow more extreme. Winter becomes truly terrifying when nights stretch endlessly, and hearth fires must be guarded like treasure. The autumn equinox no longer marks balanced days and nights. Now it heralds the descent into months of overwhelming darkness. People celebrate summer solstice with desperate fervour, as if pleading with the sun not to abandon them again. Your grandchildren will never know the security of well-lit streets. They'll consider it normal to halt all activity at dusk, to navigate by touch and memory, to fear the unseen. Already they invent games about shadow monsters that their parents wouldn't have imagined. The concept of studying or working into the night will strike them as fantastical, as stories of imperial bathhouses steaming at midnight. Darkness wins through accumulation rather than conquest. Each dimming lamp, each abandoned night patrol, each overcautious sunset retreat adds another stitch to the shroud settling over the remnants of Roman life. What began as inconvenience becomes custom, then necessity, then simply the way things are. Tomorrow's children may marvel that their ancestors ever mastered illumination beyond the campfire. The night didn't fall. It crept in slowly until no one remembered how bright the world used to be. The villa's broken gates swing in the wind, their bronze fittings long since pried off. What was once an avenue of cypress trees leading to a marble portico now resembles an overgrown animal track. You step over a shattered amphora in the courtyard, the kind that used to hold expensive garum fish sauce shipped from Hispania. Now it's just more debris crunching underfoot. Ivy climbs the frescoed walls where scenes of pastoral abundance fade under green tendrils. The artist probably never imagined his work would become a trellis. Inside smells of rotting wood and bat guano. The triclinium's dining couches sag under mouldering cushions, their expensive purple dyes now just dirty stains. A mosaic of Dionysus gathering grapes has lost half its tesserae, not to looters, just to winters seeping through the broken roof. In the library, parchment scraps flutter like wounded birds when the wind gusts through shattered windows. One nearly intact page shows columns of estate accounts, the ink blurring from repeated dampness. The numbers tracking olive harvests and slave purchases seem absurd now that the slaves have either fled or become tenants, and the olive presses stand silent. The kitchen tells its own story. Bronze pots sit exactly where the cook left them. Verdigris eating elaborate chasing that once depicted harvest scenes. A mouse nest fills the mortar where pepper and cumin were ground. The elaborate hypercost system underneath cracked during some forgotten winter, freezing the last steward to death when he came to investigate the lack of heat. His skeleton still wears the heavy iron keyring of a man who thought property meant permanence. Upstairs, the family's private quarters show hasty departures. A carved wooden jewellery box lies gutted, its velvet lining torn out. Beneath an overturned bed, you find a single gold earring shaped like a panther, the sort of trinket dropped in panic and never recovered. The children's room still has wax tablets on the desk, their school exercises halted mid-sentence. The unfinished line repeats, "Fortune favours the bold," in a child's shaky hand, the stylus groove deepening with apparent frustration before stopping forever. The bathhouse is the saddest ruin. Without slaves to tend the furnaces, the heating system collapsed ages ago. The plunge pool's blue mosaic tile now lives under a foot of muddy water where frogs breed. Someone tried to salvage the bronze taps and piping, hammering at joints until giving up. A strigil lies half embedded in the floor's mortar, where it was trampled during some forgotten struggle. The marble statues of nymphs that once watched over bathers now stand eyeless, not from vandalism, but because gemstone eyes fetched good prices in the last desperate years. Outbuildings tell of steady decline. The granary's roof fell in first, spoiling the last stores. The pottery workshop's kiln stands cold, its last batch of unfired bowls still stacked nearby like a promise no one kept. The olive press collapsed under its own weight when the maintenance crew stopped coming. Only the humble shrine to household gods remains somewhat intact. Small offerings of wilted wildflowers suggest wandering shepherds still pay respects to whatever spirits linger here. You find the vineyard overgrown with brambles. Without slave gangs to prune them, the vines have reverted to feral tangles bearing sour miniature grapes. The carefully engineered irrigation channels are clogged with debris. A decade of autumn leaves piled up behind the forgotten sluice gates. Somewhere under those leaves lies the skeleton of the estate manager, his skull cracked by an axe during the first wave of raids. His killers didn't even want the vineyards, just the iron tools from the shed. New squatters occupy the peripheral buildings. A Gothic family camps in the former steward's house, their cooking fire blackening what's left of the frescoed walls. They eye you warily, but don't interfere. They know fragile people still hold deeds to this land, even if no army will enforce those claims anymore. Their goats graze where the rose garden once bloomed, oblivious to the crushed marble statuary underfoot. The villas didn't just empty, they inverted. Wealth that once meant security became a death warrant when tax collectors and raiders came calling. Palladius's meticulous farming manuals mean nothing to men who measure land in grazing rights rather than crop rotations. Those intricate mosaics illustrating Virgil's Georgics now serve as durable flooring for sheep dung. You pocket the panther earring absently as you leave. It weighs nothing, just like the title deed some bureaucrat in Ravenna still technically holds for this crumbling estate. Across the valley, 3 other villas stand in similar ruin. The 4th, burned completely last winter when squatters knocked over a brazier. From this hillside, it's clear the old landowners didn't abandon their villas so much as the world abandoned the idea that such luxury could last. By the broken gate, a faded inscription still proclaims peace and prosperity to all who enter. Someone has chalked a crude phallus beneath it, not out of malice, just the universal graffiti of people who never learned to read the original words. The new tenants will patch the roof with thatch when the first winter storm hits, using materials the original owner would have considered fit only for peasant huts. That's how civilizations end, not with fire and sword, but with incremental downgrades no one bothers to protest anymore. The old legionary sits against the market wall like a discarded piece of equipment. His once red military cloak has faded to the colour of dried blood, the embroidery along the edges unravelling thread by thread. He holds out a chipped bowl with hands that still bear the calluses of a pilum grip. People walk past without looking. It's easier that way. His pension stopped arriving years before the last Western emperor lost his throne. Now he begs for crusts where he once marched in triumph. You recognise his face beneath the grime. 20 years ago, this man helped put down the Bagodai revolts in Gaul. 10 years back, he guarded the Alpine passes against raiders. Now children toss pebbles into his bowl and run away laughing. His uniform marks him as a relic rather than a protector. The leather strips of his lorica segmentata, missing half their bronze hinges, his Caligae sandals resoled with scraps of carpet. The eagle-crested helm at his feet stopped being regulation issue decades ago. He talks to whoever pauses long enough. Tales of serving under Aetius against Attila mix with complaints about cheese ration cuts under Majorian. The younger merchants scoff while unloading wagons. Nobody cares that he once stood shield to shield at the Catalonian plains when the fate of Rome hung in balance. Those battles seem as distant as the Punic Wars now. A Gothic mercenary buying nails from the blacksmith spits at the old soldier's feet. These new warriors fight for silver, not ideals. The legionary stories grow wilder with each telling. He claims to have seen emperors rise and fall like stage performers. Insists he guarded the very forum where Romulus Augustulus was proclaimed. Swears he marched beside Stilicho himself. The baker's wife throws him a stale roll just to shut him up. She's heard it all before, plus 3 contradictory versions. His presence irritates the new power structure. The Gothic garrison commander occasionally kicks over his begging bowl, muttering about Roman weakness. The tax collector, now working for a Burgundian warlord, pretends not to remember serving alongside him in the Limitanae border guards. Even the priest gives wider berth, since the old soldier started claiming Christ appeared to him in a legionary's cloak. You catch him trying to drill local boys one afternoon. They humour him momentarily, holding sticks like practice swords until his back turns. Then they mimic his limp and run off hooting. The movements he teaches, proper testudo formation, disciplined shield walls, mean nothing in an era where battles are decided by who brought more drunken kinsmen. His meticulous attention to proper marching cadence seems especially absurd when the nearest functioning army camps 3 provinces east. The blacksmith occasionally lets him sleep by the forge in winter. He repays the kindness by pointlessly sharpening tools already worn to nubs. His hands still know the whetstone rhythms of a soldier maintaining kit, though the sword he carries now is just an old kitchen knife lashed to a stick. At dusk, sometimes you hear him singing marching songs no one remembers. The melodies sound odd, without 50 other voices joining in. Children dare each other to touch his medals. The Falera discs, once awarded for valour, now hang crookedly from his rotting harness. A spider has built its web between 2 of them, linking honours earned decades apart. He doesn't notice. His eyes stay fixed on the northern road, perhaps watching for messengers who'll never come with news of recalled veterans. The shift happened too gradually for him to adapt. First, the silver in his pay dwindled to copper. Then supplies stopped arriving at barracks. Eventually, officers simply told their men to forage or go home. Some legionaries became farmers, others turned bandit. A stubborn handful kept reporting for duty until the forts literally crumbled around them. The Empire didn't so much discharge its soldiers as forget they existed. One morning, you find his spot vacant. The beggar bowl sits overturned near the wall, a few mouldy crusts scattered nearby. The blacksmith mentions hearing coughing fits all night. The priest mutters about Christian burial, though no one can recall the old soldier's real name to mark the grave. His medals disappear into the hands of a scrap dealer before sunset. By the next market day, a new peddler occupies the space. Some Frankish trader selling glass beads from the Rhine. The few remaining veterans who occasionally shared stories with the old legionary now drink in silence at the tavern. They've learned what he never could. Rome doesn't need defending anymore because Rome isn't something that exists outside old men's memories. The professional soldier didn't just become obsolete, he became inconceivable. Why swear? Loyalty to distant abstraction when your cousin's warband needs extra swords. Who marches in perfect formation when combat means ambushing travellers in wooded passes? That standardised equipment, those disciplined drills, the entire concept of soldiers as paid civil servants rather than armed relatives. All of it slipped away like rain-washing ink from an abandoned discharge scroll. Years later, someone will dig up a rusted lorica segmentata breastplate near the old fort. Children will play with it until the hinges snap, then discard it in a ditch. Nobody will connect the artifact to the crazy beggar who used to shout parade commands at stray dogs. By then, even the memory of standing armies will feel as mythical as stories of Egyptian chariots. The last legionary didn't just die. His entire understanding of order and service died with him, leaving behind a world where every man is his own garrison. The priest's voice carries further these days, where temple oracles once whispered through colonnades of pagan shrines, now a single sermon echoes across the town square without competition. His Latin has changed too, less polished than the old pontiffs, thickened with the same vernacular rhythms as the marketplace chatter. The altar he uses was salvaged from a Mithraeum, its carved bull-slaying scene hastily covered with a linen cloth. Congregants don't seem to mind. They've forgotten what the original carvings looked like anyway. Christianity didn't so much conquer as outlast. While imperial administrators debated tax reforms and border defences, the bishops kept appointing successors. When pagan priests fled collapsing towns, Christian deacons stayed to distribute bread. Now the church stands as the only institution maintaining records, settling disputes, and organising what passes for civic life. The bishop's authority stretches further than the nearest warlord's sword, because unlike mercenary captains, he promises something lasting. The old temples decay quietly. Mars' shrine lost its roof tiles first, valuable trading material. Then Venus's statue walked away in pieces, her marble fragments repurposed as hearth bricks. The Grand Temple of Jupiter became a quarry for anyone needing pre-cut stones. No mobs tore them down, no zealous missionaries demanded their destruction. People simply stopped maintaining what no one believed in anymore. At the edge of town, a single determined pagan still leaves bruised wildflowers at a broken altar to Diana. His grandson plays Christian hymns on a bone flute. Sunday mornings reveal the shift starkly. Where farmers once placated harvest gods with animal sacrifices before seasonal plantings, now they bring wheat sheaves to the church's blessing rites. The language of ritual hasn't changed as much as its audience expects. Incense still swings, water still sanctifies, chant melodies still rise toward the rafters. Only the names are different. The weathered farmer crossing himself before a newly painted Madonna doesn't realise how closely the gesture mirrors his grandfather's obeisance to Ceres. Church calendar marks time instead of imperial decrees. Saints' days replace Saturnalia festivals. The winter solstice becomes Christ's nativity. Farmers now divide planting seasons between Pentecost and Michaelmas rather than the old astral calculations. Even the way people date events shifts. Years measured since the last bishop's visitation, instead of by consular terms. Only the clergy still care that it's theoretically the 753rd year since Rome's founding. The baptismal font tells its own story. Fashioned from a repurposed imperial milestone, its carved letters announcing distances to vanished legion camps now sit submerged under holy water. Gothic warlords queue alongside Roman merchants to have their infants christened, though neither group fully grasps the Latin liturgy. Conversion happens practically rather than theologically. Christianity becomes the language of power, just as Latin once was. A Frankish mercenary gets baptized 3 times because he enjoys the gift-giving afterward. Church-run charity does what the Annona grain dole once accomplished. The bishop's agents distribute food during famines, ransom captives from raiders and shelter refugees. These acts of mercy incidentally centralize influence. Who needs an emperor when a local priest negotiates with barbarian chiefs using gospel parables? The episcopal palace gains better fortifications than the crumbled praetorium. Its storerooms hold more wheat than the abandoned imperial granaries. Monasteries become accidental repositories of lost civilization. Scribes copying scripture preserve fragments of classical texts in their margins. Disciplined prayer schedules maintain some semblance of orderly timekeeping. Even the monastic gardens preserve Roman agricultural techniques that vanished from collapsing villas. A visiting merchant marvels at their irrigation systems, not realizing they're simplified versions of methods described in Columella's farming manuals. The priest's vestments reveal another quiet transformation. His chasubles purple trim comes not from imperial dye works, but from crushed local berries. The embroidered crosses replace eagle motifs. Yet when he raises the Eucharist, the ceremonial gesture owes more to Pontifex Maximus rituals than anyone would admit. Religious power didn't defeat imperial authority. It absorbed the emptied space left behind. Children learning catechism absorb history's revision. They can name the 12 apostles, but not the 7 hills of Rome. The martyr Felix means more to them than the emperor Marcus. When they hear about Nero persecuting Christians, they imagine bearded villains in barbarian furs rather than clean-shaven aristocrats wearing togas. The past is being rewritten not through propaganda, but through simple forgetting. Faith fills vacuums. When tax collectors disappeared, tithes continued. As courts ceased functioning, bishops' judgments carried weight. With no legions to maintain order, excommunication became the ultimate sanction. The church didn't plan this takeover. It simply remained standing, while everything else fell. At dusk, the priest extinguishes the sanctuary lamp with practiced fingers. Only the wealthiest churches can afford constant oil now. The wavering flame dies between Christ's feet on the crucifix, a statue likely cast from melted down statues of Mercury. Tomorrow he'll visit a village whose inhabitants still leave offerings at a sacred spring, though they insist it's now St. Bridget's Well. Adaptation happens without fanfare. The old gods didn't lose a battle. They faded from disinterest. Jupiter's temples collapsed from neglect long before Christians finished debating his existence. What began as Constantine's political calculation becomes organic reality. A single god for fractured kingdoms, a unified creed for dissolving borders. The empire's ghosts haunt the rituals, incense, processions, sacred bread, but no one remembers their original meanings anymore. Faith became the new glue holding society together when everything else crumbled, not through conquest, but by default. People kneel not because they're compelled, but because the kneeling posture outlasted the structures it once served. The church didn't replace Rome so much as inherit its furniture. The crack in your cooking pot starts as a hairline fracture near the rim, barely noticeable at first. You ignore it through 3 meals before the split widens, leaking broth onto the hearthstones. Years ago, you'd walk to the market for a replacement. Now you kneel by the fire, pressing damp clay into the fissure like a field surgeon tending a wound everyone knows is fatal. The potter's workshop closed 5 winters back. Its kiln chimney stopped belching smoke when the master craftsman marched off with a passing warlord's baggage train. His apprentice tried keeping production going, but without access to decent clay from upriver or lead for glazes, his wares cracked in the firing. The last 8 pots he sold before abandoning the shop were misshapen things, lopsided and porous, their rims uneven. People bought them anyway. Now even those are gone. Bartering won't help. The travelling merchant who used to carry fine Samian ware switched to dealing in used weapons years ago. The blacksmith's wife occasionally throws crude pots, but she can't match professional quality. Your cracked pot must survive because nothing better exists anymore. You stir carefully, avoiding the weakened side. Knowing each use widens the damage. Specialisation died quietly across the empire, where hundreds of workshops once produced regional specialties, thin-walled oil lamps from Arretium, glossy red tableware from Gaul, intricate moulded glass from Syria. Now every village makes do with whatever amateur hands can cobble together. The intricate trade networks that enabled mastery collapsed before the legions did. Your temporary patch holds for a week before hot grease dissolves the clay. Now soup leaks steadily, forcing you to serve meals quickly before the fire puts out. The children eat straight from the kettle, avoiding the cracked section. Their hands get burned, but the alternatives, wooden bowls that warp and split, hollowed gourds that taste of mildew, are worse. You remember grandmother's stories about family meals served on matching bronze platters. Those got melted down for scrap long before you were born. Broken pottery litters the edges of town now. Shards of amphorae that once held Spanish olive oil poke from dirt paths. Crusted cookware fragments fill potholes on the abandoned highway. Even the rich suffer. That retired official's daughter serves meals on sections of broken roof tile because her imported dishes were stolen or sold piecemeal during the famine years. Attempts to improvise fail spectacularly. Your neighbour hollows out a stump for mixing dough, only to discover oak tannins ruin the flavour. Another family tries lining a woven basket with clay. The first rain dissolves their waterproof solution. The blacksmith experiments with hammering scrap metal into bowls, but the acidic wine corrodes them within days. Adaptations work just long enough to remind everyone how much they've lost. Odd survivors take on legendary status. One farmer boasts a perfect Campanian jug inherited from his great-grandfather. Too valuable to use, it sits on a shelf like a holy relic. The baker's wife guards her single intact mixing bowl like a crown jewel, refusing to lend it even to relatives. When the midwife's unbroken mortar cracks during an epidemic, the entire village mourns like they've lost an elder. Repairs become increasingly desperate. You wrap the pot's midsection with soaked leather strips that shrink tight when dried. It works for 3 meals before heat makes the hide brittle. Next comes a lining of beeswax, which melts into the broth on the first try. Eventually, you accept perpetual leaks as normal, positioning the crack over a collecting dish to salvage what drips through. The children learn to drink their gruel quickly. Manufacturing knowledge evaporates. Nobody remembers how to achieve the old lead glazes that made cookware durable. The secret of tempering clay with ground pottery fragments has vanished along with the professional potters. Even basic techniques like proper kiln firing temperatures fade from memory as generations pass without apprenticeships. The final insult comes when a travelling merchant offers fine Roman pottery at outrageous prices. His wares turn out to be shoddy Frankish imitations. Thick, poorly fired bowls that chip if you look at them sideways. You buy one anyway, knowing it might be years before another merchant bothers coming through your dying town. Your original pot makes it through winter before splitting completely during the spring thaw. The two halves serve new purposes. One as a makeshift shingle for the leaky roof, the other as a planter for the precious garlic cloves traded from the next village over. At supper that night, your family eats stew from separate wooden cups, no two the same size. The broth tastes faintly of pine sap and regret. Civilization had always seemed built on marble columns and bronze statues. But the truth was simpler. It stood on countless humble objects made exactly right by people who knew their craft. When those potters died without passing on their knowledge, when those trade routes snapped, something as small as a cooking pot's failure marked the end just as surely as any barbarian flag over the Senate House. The factories hadn't just closed, the very idea of factories disappeared. People forgot that meals could be cooked in vessels that didn't leak, that containers might seal perfectly, that artisans once earned livelihoods making objects ordinary folks use daily without gratitude. Tomorrow's children would inherit only the vaguest legends of a time when clay held its shape and things worked as intended. You sweep up the broken pieces carefully. Even pottery shards have uses now. Scrapers for hides, writing surfaces for market tallies, makeshift blades for harvesting herbs. Nothing gets wasted when nothing can be replaced. Tomorrow you'll try shaping a crude replacement from river clay, while the memory of proper pots lingers in your fingers. It won't hold water, but it might hold together just long enough for the next meal. That's progress now, not improvement, but delayed surrender. The rumours come with Syrian traders and Egyptian spice merchants, whispers of a city where baths still steam. where gold mosaics glitter in cathedral domes, where imperial couriers ride paved roads instead of picking through ruins. Constantinople. The word feels strange in your mouth after years of crumbling villages and abandoned forts. They say its triple walls shrug off invaders, while engineers maintain aqueducts that would make your ancestors weep. You see the evidence in occasional luxury goods, a scrap of silk that slipped through collapsing trade networks, a mosaic fragment traded down endless middlemen. The Eastern coins that turn up sometimes still bear sharp edges and full silver weight. Their inscriptions boasting of emperors who actually control their mints. That copper flagon from Smyrna in your neighbour's house, probably stolen from some Eastern merchant's corpse along the Adriatic coast. The contrasts sting. While your town's forum decays, Constantinople expands its great basilica. Where your local garrison deserted years ago, the East fields professional armies that actually get paid. Most galling, they've started reconquering parts of Italy like returning landlords inspecting a neglected estate. General Belisarius's campaign feels like a museum exhibit come to life. Roman legions marching orderly formations while your grandchildren think soldiers are just armed kinsmen following whichever chief plundered last. Greek replaces Latin, naturally east of the Adriatic. The Eastern officials who occasionally tour the West speak it fluently, switching only for legal formalities. You hear clerks mutter about Emperor Justinian's code of laws, thousands of pages meticulously organised while your village resolves theft accusations through trial by hot iron. The scholarly types claim he's rebuilding the empire. The practical ones note he's 50 years too late for places like yours. Church politics underscore the divide. Your bishop argues with envoys from Constantinople about obscure theological points, but everyone knows the real dispute: who controls the remaining patronage. When an Eastern missionary passes through with silver for converting pagans, the entire town notices how much heavier his purse sits than the local priest's collection box. Even faith has currency, and the East mints more of it. The buildings mock you most. Crude sketches circulate of Hagia Sophia's dome, allegedly so vast it defies physics. They say its interior glows eternally from reflected gilt, that its acoustics make chanters sound angelic. Meanwhile, your children stare at the collapsed roof of the old basilica, its rafters long since repurposed for fortifications. Someone claims Constantinople has underground cisterns bigger than your entire town. You almost believe it. Occasional refugees from Dalmatia bring stories of imperial restoration. They babble about Roman governance returning to coastal cities, about tax collectors using proper ledgers again. Their wide eyes fixate on trivial wonders: functional street lighting, free bread distributions, law courts that don't require bribing Germanic mercenaries for favourable rulings. Then they see your crumbling aqueduct and fall silent. Military developments feel especially bittersweet. When Eastern troops briefly reclaim Rome, veterans from your grandfather's generation openly weep. The youthful recruits sent to garrison Italian towns seem impossibly polished, their armour matching, their Latin awkwardly textbook perfect. They patrol streets their great-grandfathers might have walked, staring curiously at the mix of Germanic and Roman faces in the crowds. Some will marry local girls and stay when the empire contracts again. Trade ebbs unevenly. Sometimes Eastern grain ships appear at surviving Italian ports, their cargoes a fleeting reminder of the Annona system. More often, Byzantine merchants bypass the West entirely, their goods destined for Frankish and Burgundian courts, where gold still accumulates. The few imperial diplomats who visit barbarian kings spend more time negotiating than rebuilding. Your blacksmith's cousin saw Constantinople once. He describes covered boulevards where philosophers debate beneath colonnades, hospitals with trained physicians, neighbourhoods where dedicated craftsmen still produce goods their grandfathers would recognise. His listeners shift uncomfortably when he mentions public clocks keeping precise hours. Your sundial hasn't been adjusted for seasonal changes in years. Easter sermons take on new tensions. The priest reads epistles from Constantinople's patriarch emphasizing Christian unity, then preaches local variants that justify your village's compromises with Gothic overlords. You notice how carefully he avoids certain theological phrases favoured in. The East. Schism looms, but hunger looms sooner. Hellenistic affectations creep westward, ironically. Wealthy Goths start wearing Eastern-style tunics. Ambitious notaries sprinkle Greek phrases into documents. Even the local warlord's wife demands a proper mosaic for her chapel, paying outrageous sums for artisans from Ravenna to approximate Constantinopolitan glory. The results look garish beside crumbling Roman murals, like a child's finger painting next to a master's fresco. Rome's shadow lingers, just not here. You see it in the Eastern coins that still reach black markets, unexpectedly heavy in your palm. You hear it when travelling monks describe libraries where classical texts survive undisturbed. Most of all, you feel it every time news arrives of some distant imperial project, a reclaimed province, a reclaimed sea, a reclaimed dream, while your own world keeps shrinking downward into simpler, harder shapes. There's no grand betrayal, no single moment when the Empire abandoned the West, just generations of quiet triage that left your side of the ledger unbalanced. Constantinople didn't so much rise as fail to fall. Its light reaches you now only in scattered reflections, like moonlight bouncing off a shattered mirror. Visitors from the East sometimes marvel bitterly at how quickly you've all gone native, mixing Latin with barbarian tongues, forgetting civic rituals their cities preserve like insects in amber. They don't understand. You didn't choose the darkness. The lamps just went out one by one until their distant glow became the only light left. The fall of Rome wasn't an event, it was a lifetime. Not a single dramatic collapse, but 1,000 small disappearances. Coins vanishing from purses, magistrates abandoning their posts, children forgetting why their grandparents still care about crumbling statues. For those who lived it, the decline was deeply personal. The pot that couldn't be replaced, the neighbour who stopped speaking Latin, the road that no longer led anywhere safe. Civilization didn't shatter, it seeped away like water through cracked aqueducts. If you've enjoyed this slow-motion autopsy of an empire, drop a like, subscribe for more journeys into history's quiet endings. The past isn't done with us yet.